Well, hey, thanks for joining us. I've got my new friend, Jill Dalager Brunner, here today, and we got connected because she liked my book. And I thought, well, if you like my book, I've got to meet you. But we connected on LinkedIn and we had a great conversation. And what I wanted to do is take the opportunity to actually talk to a reader about the book and get their perspective on it, for those of you who are maybe thinking about reading or wondering what it's all about. But before we do that, first of all, thank you so much, Jill, for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Michael. I went out on a limb and messaged you, and you messaged back and invited me to meet, and I was so thrilled that I could fangirl a little bit out and talk to you a little bit more about the book and learn more about you personally. And so I was thrilled when you said, "Hey, I'd love to chat with you again, find out how the book was useful for you, and we could, grow our friendship as well."
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. I don't think my wife has ever even used the word fangirl about me, so I'm just gonna that's good enough for me right now. But anyway, cool. Well, let me first before we get started. Folks who follow my YouTube channel and my different sites know me, but tell us a little bit about you. Who are you? What do you do, and what do you love to do?
Yeah, so I'm Jill Dalager Brunner. I'm a territory executive for the ALS Association, that's Lou Gehrig's disease. And I oversee the work in Texas and really the Southwest United States. And so I'm a naturally curious person. I'm always asking a lot of questions, and my background is mainly in fundraising. And so asking questions really lends itself well to fundraising and getting to know people, learning about their goals, and then connecting their goals as philanthropists with the work that we're doing.
Very cool. Very cool. Sounds like some great work and rewarding as well, and some real purpose. And that's really wonderful. Tell me, how did you first come across the Heart of Transformation, and what drew you to it? What kind of sparked your curiosity?
Yeah, we were going through a lot of change as the organization. I was moving into a new role, and I was really looking for tools to help me as a leader and to help lead and really guide the work and my team through so much change. And I was looking for guiding principles and things that resonated with me and things that were clear, not necessarily simple, but had a nice, tight framework that I could utilize and go back to over and over again so that when I talk about, and I talked for a long time about people before process. And so some of the things I've already truthfully believed as a leader, I found in the six capabilities. And so when there were several pieces that just kept resonating with me over and over again, I thought, gosh, I really need to dig, learn more about this. I found some podcasts you were on, and I ordered your book back in April, and it's just kind of been my guidepost ever since. As I showed you before, like I got all the pages tabbed, I got all the text underlined, and I go back to it again and again.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you so much. Well, tell me, one of the things that you said you were looking for is like some of the stuff was things that you already knew, and maybe it helped bring it into a bit of a framework or give you something to work with. As you know from reading the book, one of my favorite words is useful. It's something I rate very highly. So tell me, if someone asked you what was most useful to you about my book, what would you tell them?
As I said, I'm a quite curious person and I ask a lot of questions. Some people say I may ask too many questions, but I think what it helped me do was ask the right questions in that moment, right? So going through a lot of change, changing before protecting with that, risk minimizing and the question of like what's truthfully at stake. And a lot of times, it's more risky to actually keep doing the same thing in our work. And with a neurodegenerative disorder that progresses very quickly, we don't have time to rest. We have to work urgently, and we have to come up with new models that work to serve the families that we're serving. And so some of, with the six capabilities, I kept thinking like, oh my gosh, going back to changing before protecting or learning before knowing, because we never can truthfully ever know everything. And when you value learning over just that set knowledge, I really think that's how you can be the best leader for people. So I would say that those are probably the most useful things that I found for me in the last, 9 months.
Thanks. If I could dig in a little deeper, because one of the things that I run into, so I wrote the book, but obviously I also do work for my clients, and I have small and large, and some humongous corporations that I work with. And one of the things we talk about is taking the questions that are behind the capabilities. And as you well know, the premise is that it's really hard to change beliefs. You have to change behaviors first. And one of the easiest behaviors, or clearest, I guess, most simple to introduce, is new questions. When it comes to asking and using some of those questions, did you find them awkward or hard to use, or was it easy to figure out where to use them? I mean, how did it, how did you
Sure.
start actually applying and asking some of them, and how did you make some choices around that?
Right, that's a really good question. So, my background is I had been a fundraising consultant for several years before I joined the ALS Association, and I had received training in something called TOPS. It's Technology of Participation. So, as a consultant, I really use that as a structured facilitation method. And what that does is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter who's the boss in the room. It doesn't matter what job anybody has. The belief is the wisdom is in the room and hierarchies removed, and you guide people through questions. And in doing so, you can control kind of the speed of what's going on, and if something gets off topic, you can bring it back. And as a facilitator, you have to really be the objective person in the room. If something heated comes up, which happens a lot with strategic planning, especially, people have very strong opinions about how they think something should go, even though maybe that's not truthfully, the mission of the organization. And so I felt like with TOPS, that really helped me pick the right questions at the right time, depending on what I was trying to do, right? Are we just trying to get to a consensus? Are we trying to bring out as many ideas in the room as possible? And so with that TOPS training, I felt like that made me more confident when I was going through the capabilities of what's truthfully right in the moment. I also found I use this, use the book really as a guide when I was doing planning with my team in September.
Mhm.
And what I found is if I was going down the road with certain list of questions and I wasn't quite kind of getting at what I was hoping to drive at, then I would switch tracks and say, okay, you know what? I think I'm in the wrong track when it comes to the six capabilities. Let's dig in a little bit more in another area and see if this can truthfully unearth where I am trying to take the group. Sometimes it ended up in the right place, and I just kept going with the questions. And sometimes I'd say, you know what, let's shift our focus a little bit and let's go down this road. And I mean, it's never truthfully right or wrong, right? Because the people in the room have to trust each other. And I had a few new members of my team, and my whole team and my boss had never all been in the group together working together before. So it was almost team building and trust building all at the same time. And I think because I felt so good about the questions from your book, that people really were thinking about things in new ways, and it was
Mm.
kind of fun to see the wheels turn and also get down the road places I didn't even imagine that we would go because we just trusted in that process.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You bring up two things that I think are really crucial for people, not just using my book, but anyone using a curiosity and a question based approach, or a more what I might refer to, or my friend Michael Bungay Stanley refers to as a coach like approach, which I think is so powerful. But one is that you've got the tool, but you still have to figure out, where you're going to use it. And I love how you would just go down a track, and if it wasn't quite yielding the direction, you would just make that change. We people talk so much about, agile and failing fast. Well, I mean, that's the definition of pivot. You do something, and then that's not quite where you want, you pivot a bit. But the tool is the tool. I mean, a hammer is a hammer, but if you hit a nail, that's good. You hit the window, it's not so good. So being able to use it and flex with it is great. But you also highlighted something really interesting there in a couple of spots, which is dealing with, acknowledging, or managing the power in the room. And it reminds me, when I was back in my Gartner days, we had Ed Catmull, one of the senior leaders at Pixar, come in and speak. And talking to Ed, and one of the things he would talk about early on was the need to deal with power in the room, either by acknowledging it, saying that we're going to play a different game today, or in some cases by even removing it. He talked about how early on, I think it was Steve Jobs, he had to say, "You have to leave," and he said, "No, I'll be quiet." He goes, "No, you have to leave. Even when you're quiet, you're loud. We have to have you out of here." But as you're dealing with different groups, you have to acknowledge it. We're trying. The top speaks first and everyone listens. We're trying to get those ideas
Yes.
from everyone, and you have to manage that. So that's great. Really, a couple of really good insights for using it. So if you're thinking about, I'm sure you've, read a lot of books, and I know you're a curious person, so you do a lot of research and figure out, what it is you want to do. If there was anything that was different that stood out when you're reading The Heart of Transformation, whatever it may be, if anything, what would that be? What was something different or unique that kind of caught your attention? I'd be curious to know.
Sure. I mean, I think everybody believes that the world is constantly changing, right? But actually reading that in print and really examples of technology constantly training or this solution having been the right solution at the right time, but now it's no longer right. I think you gave some grace to leaders by saying you're not wrong, you're just no longer right. And I used that several times with my team and I said, I'm no longer right in this situation. Let's talk about what the right solution can be now. And everybody laughed, but also it really, kind of took down the people's uneasiness in the room to go, yeah, you're right, this is no longer right, like let's dig in and everybody's going to have some opinion, let's talk about it. So I think the world constantly is always changing, technology is changing, and really the way we work, people say, oh, we're so busy now, we're going through a lot of change now. Really coming to the understanding that that will never change. There's always going to be a lot of change, and you
Yeah.
gotta, like, my philosophy this year has really been ride the top of the waves, don't get stuck in the troughs, just keep going, assume best intent of everybody around you and just keep going. And I think it wasn't a new idea, but I think I love the examples so much that it reinforced that I need to change my philosophy of how I'm working. And so, curiosity is the guide, I say, and then the 6 capabilities are like guideposts as well, kind of like where you are in this moment, what's the guidepost that's going to really help us.
That's great. Thank you. What a wonderful, thoughtful reflection. Yeah, it is really interesting to uh, that aspect of especially in modern day organizations. That aspect of, is it right or is it wrong is just so
Yeah.
not useful anymore, right? Because things that you can solve a problem many different ways, and it doesn't mean every solution is the only solution. And so often when I work with organizations, the one thing that I keep reinforcing is, look, when we put forward solutions and ideas, we have to remember that we are not our ideas, and since things are changing around us, all of our best ideas and all of the ideas we've had, which were the best idea at the time, can't be forever. They just can't be because things are changing so much. And I'm glad that really came through. So thank you for that. So we've talked a couple of times. You've certainly read the book. I'm curious as to what is it you're interested in next? The way I originally had phrased this question was, what did you not quite get from the book that you might wanted to have gotten, or what else might you like to see me write about, or anyone else? But is there anything that the book made you think that you think I would like to dig deeper into or learn more about X that you haven't actually found a resource for out there yet? Is there anything that might fall into that category?
Yeah, you talked about a few things in the book that I loved. One of them was how the organization is truthfully who's in the room and what's being talked about. And that, I don't know that I'm getting that perfectly right, but what I loved about this book is some of the examples of rooms you were in and either things you saw kind of running off the tracks or really great things that you actually learned that help you as a leader and facilitator and coach. So I think that would be super fascinating. Probably can't use the names necessarily of the people or of the companies, but I think that, even when you and I spoke last time and we were talking about going to art museums and what that process looks like, and I talked about visual thinking strategies and what VTS has done to guide conversations I've led with preschoolers up to people 99 years old, and really unearthing, the emotion, the experience they bring in the room. I mean, that's important no matter what, as a learner and as a leader and as an employee, right? As someone just trying to help solve problems in the world. So
Mm.
I think getting in the room with you would be really, really exciting if you can share some of those stories. That's where I would love to hear this go next.
Yeah, that's great. I'll have to, of course, my intrepid producer, Fei Wu, who you met before we started this, Fei will have to talk
Yeah.
about that because it illustrates another point. Besides questions, the other real powerful mechanism we have are stories. And they're both two things that are so straightforward, simple, and common that we overlook them. But the stories make so much difference because it creates that reality. People can say, I can relate to that. I can see myself. I can picture myself there. And I do find that is what people respond to the most, is the stories of what worked and the stories of what didn't work as well. And it just kind of, one of the challenges I think that we have with change. I'm working with a new organization now. They're in the medical sciences field. They're 3 or 4 different companies brought together with a really, big, bold purpose. And they're struggling with their own change capability and change leadership in the face of all that they have to do. And one of the things we just started talking about is I shared some, they said, well, what would it look like? And so I just said, well, instead of let me tell you about my process and my stuff, why don't I share a couple of stories? And they're like, okay, that's what we want to make happen. That's the kind of conversations we want to say happening. I said, okay, well, then we can transition into how do we make something similar happen in your organization? How do we create your own stories? And then also gathering, collecting, and sharing those can be such a powerful thing just within the organization. And we talked a little bit about the idea of leading out loud, which is, for me, it's leaders telling their stories of their own learning and growing and shortcoming and failing and learning from there and accommodating, that creates that psychological safety for others. So the stories are so powerful. So I'm glad those were useful. And that might be a fun thing to do, actually, because as my wife can tell you, Lord knows I can tell stories. So tell me, what other, is there another, any other favorite books or references you have that you also, refer to or go back to time and again that have really helped you, that you want to share with my audience?
Yeah, I love data and I love the work of Penelope Burke. I've definitely fanned out on her as well, at fundraising conferences, a lot of research she's done where, she's interviewed employees, donors, board members, and really got to the heart of, her first book was, well, the first book that I really got to know her through was, why were donors leaving organizations? What was the lapsing? What was the misstep? Where did that happen? And she really unearthed a lot of interesting tidbits I've used forever with donors. One of them I just used a few weeks ago with a donor. We're talking about how they became philanthropists, and it was through the journey of losing their son to a disease, and how that really led them to want to make something amazing in the world after the tragedy of losing their son to this terrible disease. And so, I started talking about things just from Penelope's book about all, what is it? 72% of people say they give because they saw their parents give, whether that was donating to the food shelf or donating at church or whatever that looked like, their time or their talents or their treasure. And that is such an important thing that I think of as a parent myself, that I want my sons to see, us giving and giving back to the community, and that, we work hard and we have resources, and what can we do with these resources, right? How
Yeah.
can we live a life that's just going to leave the world in a better place? And it's just really a good example. So, so I think Penelope has always been really a tried and true author for me. She signed my books. I've followed her around with a notebook and pencil at conferences, just asking, she said, walk with me and ask me all the questions you want. And I'm running behind her thinking how much I hope the conference room is so far on the other end of this building that I get 10 solid minutes with you. So she's really great. I love listening to podcasts. I have so many, I couldn't even, well, I can name one only because Ed from Pixar was just on Rich Roll's podcast.
Oh.
And it was, he said, start with a question. And I was like, oh, I got to mention this to Michael when I talk to him next. And it's so funny that you brought up Ed, because I had a note here to bring him up to you today. So I think Rich Roll has introduced me to a lot of people. My sons asked me the other day, do you know who David Goggins is? And I was like, yes, how do you know who David Goggins is? And I said, I know him because of the Rich Roll podcast, but I'm a curious person, and I love how Rich Roll just interviews so many different people, and how I get just introduced to amazing experts across the board, and then diving into their podcasts and their books. So Ed was on recently, and I just thought that was a timely person to bring up, and you beat me to it today, Michael.
Well, sorry to steal your thunder there, but yeah, Ed's great, and there's so many wonderful people to learn from out there, and I admire that you're taking the regular time to continue to put learning before knowing, as I might say, and that's a wonderful thing. And it's and thank you so much again for initially reaching out and being a fan. The kind of work that I do doesn't draw millions of fans, but the ones that I seem to get are really thoughtful and intelligent people like yourself. So it's certainly a pleasure. It's people like you that I wrote the book for, and I'm always amazed that when I connect with people who have found me, through my writing or things like that, is that there's always some real depth to them and what they're doing, what they're trying to do with their lives and in the world, and maybe it's to their job, maybe it's to their families, their social organizations, whatever it may be. But it's a pleasure to have you as a reader, certainly, and I really appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else that you'd like to say or share before I thank you again and let you go for the day?
Anything I'd like to share? I think thank you for writing this book and for, sharing your stories and being really open, even with me, during our last call, really diving in more to tell me about your work. It sounds fascinating. I loved consulting so much, and I really find as a fundraiser and as a leader, a lot of the work I do is coaching too. And I find a lot of similarities to my kids' sports teams and the coaches they have and the mentor, the other adult mentors they have in their lives. So thank you for writing the book and putting it out into the universe. I know it's never an easy process to write a book, but having something worthy of sharing that's going to help others, I think is really admirable. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. I certainly appreciate that. And it does, maybe I know a good point to end on is it reminds me of, one of the things that I'll teach my clients a lot is if you want to learn something, the best way to do it is to just get a bare grasp of it, then start teaching it to somebody else, because that helps you think it through and you hear their reactions and their questions and their wonderment about it and their disbelief, and it allows you to dig further into it. So, but it's always it was a pleasure to write the book, and certainly a pleasure to have conversations like the one we've had, and to have made a new friend in you through the book is a wonderful thing. So I thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. I'm sure the my listeners and viewers will really appreciate it. And I know we'll be talking about, more things to come in the future. It's great having you as a new friend. So thank you so much.